on just responding after things happen. One way to see this is data from the same household surveys, but this time it's asking people how do they respond to shocks. What we see is they do draw on their savings to some extent, which is in pale green. Some do have formal credit and insurance, which is in pale blue. But in some countries, the credit and insurance tend to be much more informal, which is in dark blue. And then they also just cope afterwards by selling assets or even by reducing their consumption, which is in dark green. Another way to see this balance between how much they can prepare before or cope afterwards is through an index we put together on preparation for risk. So we thought of different categories that are important for preparing for risk in advance. And this could be physical and financial assets, human capital, social support, and state support. And so what we see is clearly from this risk preparation seems highly correlated with income. But there are really interesting differences across regions. So for example, Chile is quite well prepared for risk, but it's neighbored by Argentina, which has only average preparation, despite having a similar level of income per capita. Across the world, Egypt is in the middle quintile for preparation, but it tends to do quite well in the middle income group. So it actually does better than some high middle income countries. For example, it's in a higher category than my own country, South Africa, even though income per capita is half. So the message is, yes, resource is clearly important for preparation, but policies can also have a big effect. So when we look at this map overall, we asked ourselves, well, why are more countries better at preparing for risk? And well, maybe it's just too expensive. So what we did is look at a number of studies across many different categories of risk and look at how the benefits of preparation compare to the costs. And what these studies find is that the benefits exceed the costs, sometimes overwhelmingly so. So to give just one example, the benefits of administering nutritional supplements outweigh the costs of treating malnutrition and illness by a factor of at least 15 times. Now, to say something is cost effective doesn't mean that you have the resources to fund it. But actually, lack of resources is only one of many obstacles that we find that impair risk management. And this is something we really emphasize in the report. Many studies look at risk and policies to address those risks, but they don't think about the obstacles that prevent risk management from being better. And so we say you really need to identify, prioritize, and address those obstacles. So let me briefly just say a little bit more about the different obstacles. So the first one we mentioned is lack of resources, but also of information. This chart shows, it's from a climate study, and it's looking at future precipitation in Africa. And you can see that under different scenarios, it has very different results. So if you don't have clear information, it becomes very difficult to plan for those risks. Another area of obstacles is missing markets and public goods. As we said, it may be difficult to manage your risk if insurance markets just don't exist, or if you don't have access to public services that are really important. So managing health risks without access to clean water and sanitation is very hard. Another area of obstacles is lack of collective action. And this may be because individuals don't have the incentive to act on collective risks. This photo shows a picture that's actually common in many Asian cities. What happens is that pollution builds and blocks the drainage system, but nobody feels as though it's their responsibility to clean that garbage. And then when the heavy rains come, the flooding is very much exacerbated by the fact that the drainage system is not working well. We also know that there are cognitive and behavioral failures that may impair risk management. So, for example, people may find it difficult to judge probabilities, but especially to assess risks that evolve over the long term. But maybe more importantly, they may not act even when they know those risks are important. So, for example, we all know that texting whilst you're driving is not helping your safety, and yet many people do that. I will just end by adding one more on this list of obstacles, which is about political economy issues, and particularly the fact that the costs for risk management are upfront, but the benefits tend to happen in the future, and that if a big crisis happens and as a politician you respond to that, you may look good, whereas by stopping the crisis from happening, you may not be rewarded for that. And I think that links to something that Norman said, how to make the institutions that can manage these risks over a long time that may be separate a bit from the political process. So all in all, how do we take these, all of these obstacles into account? And this is sort of a set of screens. We mean it to show layers of thinking. So sure, you start by thinking about what the risks are, but then you really spend time thinking about the obstacles. Are the wrong incentives in place? Why could that be? Is the information available to the people who need to act on that information? Are there behavioral biases? If all of those seem okay, maybe lack of resources is really the critical factor, but we didn't put that first because if you don't have the other aspects in place and you have lots of resources, your risk management will still not be good. And then on the basis of all of that, how can you design policies that really help risk management? And I don't mean to suggest that this is a really simple, easy thing that governments can just do overnight. Of course, there are really difficult trade-offs in designing policies for improving risk management, but by thinking of obstacles systematically, we think this can help to identify the critical gaps and thereby improve risk management. So we look very much forward to your questions.
Thank you very much to Norman, Loisa, and Kyla Whitley for this exhaustive presentation of the report. The report is extremely interesting, as human development reports are generally, and as mentioned by Norman and by Kyla, as I said at the beginning, I don't think that anyone, or Mr. Schaffer, anyone working on development issues has not made use of well-developed reports over the years. I think I will take 3 minutes just to emphasize what both of the speakers said, that risks exist. There are different types of risks. We have risks of natural disasters, we have socially created risks. Societies should prepare for facing up to these risks. There are preparations on the part of civil society, on the part of the private economy, and on the part of the state. The state, I guess, at the central level and at the local level. Civil society, large civil society organizations, they also included households. Theoretically, this is controversial, but it is, in any way, it is society, even if it is not civil society. The economy, the private economy, they emphasize the private economy. In many countries, you also have the mixed economy that should prepare. They drew up for us an institutional framework and a policy framework. Policies are not worth a great deal if there are no institutions to follow up on them and to implement them. So I think I will not go into the details of the policies. I just retained your underlining of what I consider social protection. You talked about insurance, you talked about what I consider social security. you talked very interestingly about infrastructure as protection. As protection, not only as production means to produce, but also as protection. And we know of course, that many people in the countryside cannot reach hospitals and medical services because of lack of infrastructure. But you also emphasize that risk is an opportunity. That if you want to advance, you need to seize opportunities. And opportunities per se are risks. You cannot have an opportunity, a rewarding opportunity, if you do not accept risk. And you should be prepared to accept risk in an organized manner. You should prepare to take up these risks individually, but if you cannot do it individually, there is a role for the state to help you take up these risks. Thank you very much for this extremely interesting, and I think that the universal character of knowledge and of wisdom is quite interestingly, was quite interestingly pronounced by Norman. He said at one point that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of care. In Arabic we say, al-wuqaya khayrun min al-ilaj. And then he said that accumulating savings in good times for use in bad times. And in colloquial Egyptian Arabic, we say al-irsh al-abyad yinfa fil yawm al-aswad. And in fact, these are condensed wisdoms that cross country. And you also draw up the policy framework at the local level, at the national and the international level. What the international system should do to help countries, especially those countries most at risk of facing risk. Thank you very much for your presentations, and the floor is open. And first to out of the floor is my good friend, Dr. Eban Assar.
First, I want to thank them for this very interesting presentation. But can I remind
Microphone, Mahmoud.
First, I want to thank you for this very interesting presentation, which is very much compatible with what is happening here. But can I remind you, about the social risk management practices and the social risk management theories and the social risk management writings that emerged since 1997 in the World Bank. And we have applied them here in 2004, and we have made a very big matrix on how to cope, mitigate, and mitigate and cope with the risk management. And we even applied it on the macro, meso, and micro level, and with formal and informal also procedures. And we found that in Egypt here, the informal procedures are the ones which are protecting the society. In terms of 73% of the responses, they said it's informal. But after that, it has been even adopted by the government. It has been even adopted in the 1,000 village story of the poorest villages and all that. And at that time, but the problem is that it has been adopted but not implemented because of it is information issue. How we get the information for all the informal and the formal initiatives and the meso level and the micro level, so it's an informal. Then they don't want to us to intervene at all at the macro level, to intervene in the informal initiatives to cope and to make because they hide it and they find it their solution for living. This is second. Third, the human capacity. We didn't have the human capacity, or we didn't have human resources to be able to follow with all this. Initiatives, and with all the informal and informal, and with all the activities that are done to go mitigate and the sequencing, the timing, and the monitoring and evaluation for all what has been happened. So it is such a nice approach, which could help for sure, because risks are there, but to be implemented in a sequence and to be adopted, this needs really human capacity, as I said, and information one, human capacity, and monitoring and evaluation for all.
Thank you, Dr. Nassar. Would you like to comment, or shall we take a few comments and questions first? Yes? Yes, sure. Eva, could you please? Dr. Eva Nassar is Professor of Economics at Cairo University. Ambassador Munir Zahran.
Thank you very much for your very comprehensive and clear presentation of the two speakers. Unfortunately, I was not in a position to read the report before coming here. There are two ideas in my mind which were not presented by the speakers, but maybe they are in the body of the report. These are as one of the obstacles, the issue of red tape, bureaucracy on the one side, and the other one, the issue of corruption. Whether that corruption in the government itself or between the private sector and the government together. Thank you.
Behind that.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I kind of thought it was kind of, I guess, opportune and coincidence that the World Bank would come out with a report on managing risk for development in the year that Robert Shiller wins the Nobel Prize in economics. And I'm really a fan of Shiller's work, and especially using markets to mitigate risk. All the different sort of ideas that he's had, using sort of different forms of equity and different forms of insurance-based models to mitigate risk. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on, how we could better use markets in order to sometimes even mitigate market risk, which is one of the things Schiller was famous for, especially for the poor.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment on these three questions, and then we'll take another round of questions?
I think I will start. I will. Well, first of all, I thank you all for the comments, and I will just. I think I have spoken enough, so I will touch briefly on what you have provided. On Dr. Nassar, we have used to a large extent the social risk management framework that was elaborated by the Social Protection Unit of the World Bank. But we faced the challenge that we wanted to integrate other forms of risk and also other forms of risk management, and not only look at the issue of risk from the perspective of social protection. There is enough knowledge in the literature and also enough experience in the World Bank and other agencies to address this issue in a more comprehensive perspective, taking into account also the financial angle, the private sector, the enterprise perspective, the macroeconomic perspective. So one of our goals, especially at the beginning, was to integrate different disciplines and these different areas of expertise within the bank and also across the expert community. And so the report that we present tries to, in fact, build those bridges that are necessary for people in different areas to communicate with each other. So in our framework, for instance, you will probably not find exactly what people from the disaster risk management community use, the terms may be different, or our friends from the financial sector, they would use also different terminology. But I think they can look at our framework and see how they can position themselves. And they can also then understand the terms and the approaches that other experts use. I also want to comment on the issue of informality. It is very true that in the majority of developing countries, informal mechanisms are the rule. But it is also true that there is an evolution of these mechanisms from informality to formality. That doesn't mean that the informal mechanisms are fully replaced even in the most developed countries. That's not true. For instance, communities are still important, families are very relevant wherever you go. But little by little, all mechanisms for risk management become more formal, particularly in two areas. One is in regards to the financial system, and two is in regards to the enterprise sector. In those two areas, you see the presence of markets, formal markets, and also the presence of governments being a lot more important. And we see that evolution as something positive. And in some cases, we even encourage that evolution. As I clearly said in the case of the enterprise sector, we want more people to be formalized, more people to work together in enterprises rather than be self-employed. So, Ambassador, thanks for your comment. Probably we didn't say this very explicitly, but we do consider that red tape and corruption are important obstacles to risk management. In fact, one of the principles that I discussed, the first principle of not creating uncertainties or unnecessary risk, has a lot to do with the behavior of governments. And it is when these governments are excessively bureaucratic and when they are guided by these forces of corruption, is that when they become actually threats to the security and to the safety of people, rather than support mechanisms for better outcomes. So we have this as the very first principle, and we very much agree with this position, that governments are there to support people and not to exploit or make people feel less safe or insecure. Then the gentleman who asked about markets and the connection with risk, we actually highlight, especially at the beginning of the presentation, that the only path to development is by seizing opportunities. This is actually a point that Dr. Awad remarked in his comments. That I cannot think of a single instance where seizing an opportunity doesn't also entail a risk. And the more secure, the more protected people feel and are, then the more opportunities they will try to seize. And it is through that seizing opportunities that they can actually improve. That was the case, as I said, of these Indian farmers, that once they had rainfall insurance provided by the market, provided by the state, then they were more willing to adopt new technologies for cultivation. But that was just only one example. In fact, all over the world, what we see is not that people take too much risk. It's just the other way around. People take too little risk, especially the poor. And because they take too little risk, is that they are not able to seize opportunities that can benefit their lives. And I'm glad that you mentioned this Robert Schiller, and we actually were happy about this coincidence of having the Nobel Prize in Economics given to Eugene Fama and Robert Schiller at the same time. Eugene Fama, as you probably know, is well known for his contributions to financial markets and to highlighting how perfect financial markets can become. Whereas Robert Schiller goes to the other side and talks about the inherent instability of financial markets, especially when it creates bubbles. So we see this duality of financial markets, and it's very much present in that report. On the one hand, we need inclusion in financial markets. financial markets are very relevant for credit, for insurance, for savings. We need them. But they can also be a source of risk if they are unstable. If, for instance, these bubbles are formed and they're not controlled, they can have massive repercussions. And we need to address these trade-offs. That's the most important lesson that we derive in our analysis of the financial system, addressing the trade-offs between inclusion and stability. And the way that we say it should be done is through macroprudential policy. Thank you.
Yes, first.
Thank you very much for Partners in Development and the World Bank. My name is Hassan Shami. I am chairman of Egyptian Association for Scientific and Technological Development. I read before about a book of World Bank about transparency. I don't see here what transparency and corruption for risk and opportunities, because many countries, although in transition period, will suffer from corruption in governments, in civil society, in private sector. How can we overcome this corruption? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. My name is Hélène Joufaki from the French Development Agency. So thank you for this report, because it is very opportune to gather in one book different literature, because you are gathering, risk confronting natural disaster, health, employment, normally totally different instruments and different literature. So thank you very much. And it's also a very good analysis on what to do, because your recommendations are very precise and also many topics, going from financial system and flexibility in labor and different things. But I think that now what is missing maybe is how to do that, because it's maybe an economic program or political program as such, and I would like to be interested in knowing your lessons, for your action at the World Bank, and maybe how donors could help in, implementing your recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Shahizaki from Cairo University. And actually I have a similar question to the lady's question, because you presented the benefits and the measures that should be implemented. But I think one of the most important aspects that should be taken into account, who's going to finance this, because at the household level, at the firms level, and at the community level, most of the measures are costly. So I was wondering, will it be some interventions from the international community, or there are some other sources that the government would generate in order to finance all these measures? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Should you comment now on these three questions?
So I would just come on the point of how to finance them, and whether instruments really have to be costly is the first question. So I think that they may not be. So one of the examples that Norman showed was of using really just loudspeakers and bicycles to warn people about the risk of a natural disaster in your area. And in many instances, we can see that actually you can find measures that are not costly that may be very effective. In fact, in some cases, the very costly, expensive measures may not necessarily help if the uncostly measures are not in place. So what do I mean by that? Well, we find that in many countries, people build a lot on the coast, which is very exposed. And then to protect themselves from that risk, they build very big walls. But then people are building even more behind the walls because they sort of feel protected, and this is, it's like a paradox of safety. so that rather than learning about the risks and acting in a different way, you invest a lot of money that may not help that. So one point is that actually you can find measures that are not that costly that might be very effective. And to the extent that measures that are needed are costly, I think that this is something that can be an important role for the international community. So we say that the international community has an important role when risks are exceeding the boundaries, there are global risks, but also the capacity of countries. And there are some nice examples, I think, of donor agencies helping to improve risk management in certain areas.
So I think it has been very clear. I will only emphasize that the better measures are not necessarily the more costly measures. And in this set of screens that Kyla showed in her presentation, you saw